Right, well, hello everyone. It's really great to see so many people turn out for today's webinar. I'd like to sort of spread the good morning, good afternoon and good evening as we have obviously participants from around the world, and welcome you to today's webinar, which is the consequences of sharing non-consensual content. Before we start, I'd just like to mention a few things. Firstly, we've made sure that the participants are muted and that the videos have been disabled. This doesn't mean that we don't want you to participate. Of course, we would love you to ask your questions, and you can submit these via the chat and they'll be asked at the end in the Q&A. It's just so that we can focus on the presenters and allow for everyone to engage in the same way. Secondly, we are going to be recording today's session. It's probably popped up on your screen. This is for internal purposes and to share only with participants after, or participants who've registered who are unable to attend at this moment in time. I will be monitoring the chat throughout, but I'll also be asking the questions at the end. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask it now if you think you might be forgetting it, or send it when we get to the Q&A. And lastly, if you want to take a break, you can always do so. Just make sure that your mic is off and your camera's off if it isn't already, and step away from the screen. And if you obviously would like to sign up for any future webinars, you can do so, and one of my colleagues will put the link in the chat for you. So at this moment in time, I would like to present our speakers for today. Firstly, we have Sophie Josephson, who is the Senior Child Rights Advisor and Specialist on Participation, as well as Jonas Karlsson, a quantitative sociologist and researcher for ECPAT Sweden. And I'd now like to hand over the mic and the floor to both Sophie and Jonas.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And we're very happy to be here today to be able to share this webinar with you guys. Just to start, we're just a brief thing about ECPAT Sweden, which is the organization that Jonas and I work for. We're a child rights organization in Sweden, and we are working against child sexual exploitation. We are sharing knowledge about sexual crime to prevent it from happening. We also work with public opinion and influence. We also run ECPAT Hotline, and also Your ECPAT, which is a support line for children who have experience of child sexual abuse. And we also have a parent helpline. Yes, that's about it.
Yeah, next slide. And today we will have a brief discussion about methodology, then the purpose and the background of the research we did, and that is mainly divided into why are children sending nudes, and with nudes we mean self-generated intimate images, and the social context of those pictures and films, but also why are they shared without consent, and how does that change the meaning of the pictures. The consequences of non-consensual sharing for the child, and how the child is dealing with the exposure of those images, and then a discussion. And we can take next pictures. Next slide there, yes. And first a few things about me and my work with surveys. I have worked with surveys for about 15 years now, and the last 8 to 10 years almost exclusively with surveys directed to children. I have also worked a lot with children participation, and there is a problem with surveys I have realized during those years, that they are very rarely constructed in a way that children can feel comfortable with working with. We have the problem with falling response rate in all surveys, and we also have the problem with adults doing surveys for children, not inviting the children in different parts, constructing a thin data that we really can't contextualize without the help of children, and we normally don't do that. So this is kind of my holy grail, that I have been searching for in 8 years, that I have been able to do in a way I'm comfortable with at ECPAT. And before we construct the survey, we meet children in focus groups and individual interviews. And we do this to construct stories that is the base in those surveys, but also the responses that other children have to those stories. And this heightens the relevance. The children will engage in the material in a completely other way than in normal surveys. And the language that the children actually understand what is standing. We use nudes, as I said, instead of self-generated images, because the children use the word nudes, dick pics, tit pics, that kind of language we getting used to it because we work with children. And you can, so those focus group and interviews is a part of the construction of the survey. And next slide. As I said, stories and responses based on the children's experience. The theme of the stories are sexual exploitation, harassment, and abuse. The survey have a total of 17 stories with 5 responses on each story and a free text option also. We also ask about own and other experience, if the children themselves have experienced something close to the story, or if they know someone else. We also have 4 theme areas. This time it was about exposure to crime, what parents should know, what ECPAT should know, and if they wanted to share a story with us. And throughout the survey, they have the possibility to free text responses, and they are using those extensively. Next slide. And to start out, how do the participants are recruited and are going through this survey? It's a self-selected sample. We have information about this survey on Snapchat and Instagram for children 10 to 17 years of age. We know that it's 13 to be there, but we all know that 10 years are also there. And we guarantee them anonymity by having just a few control variables and by not collecting the EP addresses of those. And each child will be randomly assigned to a maximum of 3 stories and 1 theme area. In fact, they can choose the theme area they're most interested in. They can quit after 1 story, and we will still count them. So we use every story as a part of this. We can always get some data out of those. And that's kind of necessary because boys will not answer fewer stories in medium than girls. So it would be, otherwise it would be very biased toward girls' stories. And the survey ran for 6 days in the beginning of June last year. And then we closed it because we started to get too many answers. You can change slide. We got 12,836 children responding to this. In the age group 14 to 17, we had about 2% of every child in Sweden. There was 55% girls and 41% boys. The rest, the few other percent, were those who didn't want to tell us or was non-binary. They answered on a total of 23,231 stories and left us with 4,000 free text responses. The first year we did this, then they could have a free text answer of 400 characters. We thought that was enough. It wasn't. This year it was 2,500 characters. It was still not enough for all the ones. Some of those answers are extensively and tell us a lot of data. And out of this, we can get quite a different data visualization. If you change slide, this is the main. On the left, you see one of the stories. You can't see actually what it's saying, but this is about selling pictures. On the right, you see the quantitative visualizations about this. You have on the bottom half, you have the percentage of girls, boys, and non-binaries who answer on those 5 different options. That was attitudes to selling nudes. In the top, you have I have experience of this, where you see that 30% of the girls and 27% of the non-binary have experience about thinking about selling pictures, because in the story she's not really selling. It ends with when she's thinking about sending the pictures, but just 8% of the boys. We then also have hundreds of quotes connected to this, so we can get in and understand how was this experience for those children. And you can change slide. We also have more traditional quantitative diagrams. Here we have the children's exposure to online sexual offenses, where we see that about 9 out of 10 girls and about half of the boys have received unsolicited nudes. 57% of the girls have been offered money for nude pictures, and 21% of the boys. We all recognize those kind of diagrams or visualizations, but we have, since it was self-selected sample, we must be careful when to talk about it. It's the patterns that is more interesting than the point estimate. And change slide. What we're doing today is a digital ethnography. We use those 4,000 free text responses and walk through them to understand the context in which children send intimate images to each other. And this is very subjective stories. There is personal experience, and that's because we see this the child as an expert on their own situation. But when we use the quotes that you will see a lot of here, because this is qualitative, we don't just have one quote on the theme that we are showing you. We have dozens, and through these we find themes and patterns throughout the material. And when we have collected all this, we also put in the child as an analyst, because probably change slide. Because the child as an analyst is that we create focus groups where children not participating in the survey are responding to other children's quotes, and in that way contextualizing those very private subjective responses, and help us understand what does this mean. What does sex mean in a digital context? What does the relationships means in a digital context? And while doing so, they also creating a base for further studies for our next survey that will come next time. And you can skip the next slide and go directly to the social You can skip, yeah.
And just to start off, before we go into the analysis of the free text responses that Jonas said, this is a very important quote from a non-binary child that says, sometimes it's the only place where we can be, where it's safe and we're not judged. Please don't take away our safety net just because you've heard horror stories. There always will be people who want to exploit us. Don't take away something that is important to us to attempt to protect us. And when we do this, we're out talking about this survey, it's very important to remember that the children nowadays live their lives on and offline. It's a kind of a combination of both. Their whole life is going on both on and offline, which means that they will flirt online, they will explore their sexuality online, they will have relations online. And sometimes those relations are mainly just online, and sometimes they are a mixture of off and online. So there is not two separate worlds when it comes to children, there is one. And it's important to take that into account when we're going into the free text responses. And I don't think it's an accident that this is a non-binary child who has given us this quote, since we know that non-binary children see the internet as positive and a way to safely explore their sexuality in a way that would perhaps not be possible in different parts of society. You can change slide. So when we're doing this webinar, we are only focusing on the positive, the consensual sharing of children. So the free text responses here are from children that have sent nude images to each other, and it's sent without compensation, it's sent without pressure, it's sent without threat. We know that in this study, about 48% of all the children who have participated have shared images. And the recipient is often another child. We can also see in this study, which you can get online free. We can also see that it's more common that the children are sending nudes to themselves than having another, sending them to an adult, for instance. We also know that from these 48% that have shared nude images, about 23% of the girls and 16% of the boys are having those images shared without consent. So it started off as something positive, something explorative, something they perhaps did to gain trust or amongst themselves, but at some point this positive experience began to be something else. So the material in itself from the start was not child sexual abuse material, but when it's shared without consent, the importance of the materials will change. You can change the slide. So one of the most common questions that Jonas and I get when we're out talking about this survey is, why are children sending nudes? Why are they doing it? Why is it important? Like one girl say, I sent to my ex-partner that I had known only for a few months on Snapchat. Here is a relationship that is just online, which is just as valid as a relationship offline for the children. It was a long distance relationship, one boy says, and we exchanged nude just like any couple that wasn't able to meet that often. It's explorative, it's a part of a relationship, it's a way to connect, to show each other trust. A girl says, we were friends, not more than that. We thought it was a fun thing to do. You can change slide. Children also share nudes with each other as a form of casual contacts. We talked a lot on FaceTime, and one night one led to another. We both thought it was something exciting. Boy, 17. A girl says it was an anonymous chat, wanted to try. My face was not included. Another girl says, we talked and I got horny, and it has happened several times. So it can be casual contact, it can be among friends, It's not necessarily sexual. Sometimes, like we saw in the previous slide, it can be a way of experimenting or building trust amongst themselves. It can also be a safe space for exploring your sexuality. And you can change slides. What we also see when we go through these free text responses is that most of the children are very much aware of the risks of sending nude images. They know it might be a risk and they're willing to take it, but they don't want it to be harmful, but they know that it might be a risk. We also know that in this social context of sharing nudes, there are a lot of rules amongst children. For instance, a girl here says, I think it's disrespectful to save other nudes. Trust must be mutual. I give it from my side. Risky, yeah, but worth the risk. I normally ask the person if it's okay before I save the image. A lot of children in these free text responses, like Jonna said, we have selected a few of these quotes, but we can see these patterns among the free text responses. So we can see that a lot of it is about trust, it's about respect, and it's very important for them when producing these images and sharing them to someone else, that these rules are upheld. You can change the slide.
And here we see a result from our focus group when children help us to analyze the material. Here they have been asked to put in different reasons to send this picture to each other, when it's not okay at all until it's okay. Farther to the left, not okay. Farther to the right, okay. And if it's risky or safe, where risk is in the bottom and safe in the top. So if it would be safe and okay, it would be in the upper right corner, where we see there isn't much at all. The blue dots is when you send it within a romantic relationships. And we see most children think this is okay to send them, but it's very risky. The orange dots are when you send as a form of sexual exploration. And here we see it's not as okay as sending within a relationships, but it's not that bad either. And in fact, it's a bit less risky than sending within a relationship. And the yellow dots are for sending for attention, for getting compliments and so on, where the children say, this is not okay at all. But at the same time, it's the least risky way to send those pictures. And this was a bit confusing until we listened to the children, and the reason why it's okay to send to people you are in a relationship is because you are in a relationship. You should be able to trust. But the risk is nothing is really stable, and if you get mad at each other, if it's a hard breakup, then this person knew your friends and can share your intimate images within your friendship circle. That's what the children are concerned about. That's the risk within relationship. The risk within sexual contacts, that is more you don't really know who you're sharing those pictures with as something. You thought you were sharing it with a human, but it turned out to be an adult. And the yellow ones, for attention, that is, then they're talking about it. This person is sick, have a very bad, this is like an addiction and so on. So there is also different kind of risk involved. And you can change slide.
And what we see is that when, like we said before, that there are a lot of rules and a lot of when you are sharing images with with another person. You're sharing and you're trusting the person. It's about respect. You don't save the nudes without asking. You don't save them. You ask if you can share them and so on. We have a lot of rules before something happens, but as soon as something happens, as soon as the image is sent without consent or shared without consent, all the rules that apply to how to be a respectful, trusting partner just vanish. And we see that all the blame is put on the victim in this case, because when the images are shared without consent, it turns into CSAM. And for instance, here we have a boy who says, girls must stop sending images because you never know what happens in the future. You put a lot of blame on the victim and not on the person who is sharing the image without consent. Sharing nude images have been more normalized. People view them as trophies and an object to brag about, among other things. We also see that amongst themselves, a lot of boys are using a very misogynist language. They are discriminating against women and girls. And these images sometimes are shared within closed groups, closed settings with groups, the kind of behavior we see when it comes to adult offenders, for instance, that you are in a closed chat forum and you're sharing these images such as trophies. They have a value in itself. We also see that if it's a girl that's, it's harder to get an image from a girl, the value of the picture that you received is higher than when you have got an image from a girl that is easier to pressure or so on. So we see the kind of homosocial behavior amongst boys, for instance. And here you can put the blame on yourself, even though the other person is to blame. So like I say, everything that the children have talked about, trust, respect, and so on, it's completely vanished once the images is shared without consent. You can change.
So if we see the reason why those nudes are shared without consent, that we saw in the focus group also, is the most common is change in the relationships. I think it's more common that one sends to one's partner because you trust them. Many of my friends have sent nude to their partners and then had them shared without consent, a girl says. But this also starts very young, like we see in the next quote. Like I was about 10 and had just started, just got Snapchat, wrote with a guy from a Swedish town, and he used to send some back. But as usual, he sent of touching his stomach, I take nudes, he saved them and then exposed me after a fight. He got help from a chick that lived from the same dam. So, I mean, those have been consensual, sent to each other, but then shared without consent when they have broken up or get angry at each other. You can change slide. But we also see a lot where one person have sent with consent, but the receiver from the beginning have planned to share this picture without consent. It was horrible. I was 12. I trusted him not, him too, but he sent the pictures to an account on Snap called Nude Expose Sweden then, or something like that. I think the police should take more responsibility about things like that, and Snap should generally take down accounts like that. And also, it was my friend who sent nudes to a guy, and he screened that picture and spread to a so-called expose account and tagged her with her Snapchat, city, and age. And in those cases, we often see that you take personal information or even personal picture from other contexts along with those intimate images when you share them to make most damage to the one who shares those, who have sent those pictures. You can change. We also see a rather common theme that is revenge. I sent nudes to a guy and he showed them to all his friends. It turned out that it was my ex who have asked this guy to ask me for nudes. So he could take revenge on me for telling his parents that he had been drinking alcohol and doing other things. My ex even offered this guy that I sent nudes to money to get him to do it. So you set up rather complex schemes after when you want revenge on someone. You can ask your friends, or in this case, a love interest, to get those nudes to then share them. And you can change slide. And as Sophie said, we have those social bonding in closed group. Here we have a boy who told that everyone was in a group chat and everyone sent nudes of girls. This quote is rather going on when he telling that then a picture of his sister appeared in this group, and when he asked how did you get this one, the person who posted it said, well, that whore just sent it to me because I threatened to kill her horse. And they are getting into a fight, but even after that, he don't reflect over the fact that he was in a group chat where everybody was sharing this kind of pictures without consent. So it seems to be a rather common and problematic behavior among boys. You can change slide.
And what we see, and I'm going to show you some examples of this after this summary, that we see that these images that we are talking about here are nudes that have been sent first with consent and then have shared without consent. So we are in this webinar, we're not focusing on the images that have been produced under threat or pressure or other forms of violence. We are just talking about the images that first were shared positive and then something happened and then it got out of control. And it's important to see that what we can see that the first of all, having the image shared without consent is a child. I mean, it's a sexual offense against a child. But what we also see is with what Jonas said, that we see it quite common that these images are shared amongst a big group of person, and it's often that the person sharing the images is someone that the child already knows. It can be a partner, it can be a classmate, it's often someone they trust. And we also know that it's more likely for that person to share the image without consent if it's a person that is close to the child. It's not as often that it is the stranger who is sharing the images. So it would be, I'm not suggesting, but it would be perhaps some cases the strategy of only sending to someone you trust is not a very good strategy. But what we see is that this constant, like I'm going to show you in a bit, having this image shared without one's control, we can see that the children are telling us that they have problems with school, and this is due to the fact that the images are shared in school. And like Jonas said, the child is often tagged with their name, their account number. They can also sometimes be the names of the parents, for instance. Sometimes they are sharing the images with the parents. So the whole idea behind this is that to shame the child as much as possible. And this is, of course, creating enormous amount of stress among these children who have had their images shared. They talk about a lot of fear and insecurity of being further abused. Some of them give up. They resign to this fact. They are having problems with their mental health. We have a few who have disclosed that they've tried to take their lives due to this, having these images shared without consent. There are a lot of worries about the future. What happens if I move or if I start a school in another town? If they search for my name online, they will see these images and so on. We also see that once the images are shared without consent, some persons among or some offenders see it as is possibility to further abuse this child, to harass or to pressure or to tell them that you've shared these images once, why can't you give me another image? And so on. We had a child that told us that she gets like 150 people a day that contacts her about these images. And further threats, and also sometimes being exposed to further abuse when you're trying to confront the person who is sharing your images. You can change slide. For instance, one of these, like I said, problems with school. Now the whole school has seen it, the nudes. So I get called a lot of words, and I don't go to school anymore. I can't even go to town without someone yelling things at me. I was 12 and he was 18. I reported it to the police several times, but the investigation was dropped. That was about 4 years ago, and he's still sending them around. I need help, but I don't know where to turn. After 5 police reports, I gave up. You can take next slide. And then when the picture spread, a lot of people wrote to me and called me things and said that because I've already sent, the pictures are everywhere. I can send to them, and even say that if I don't send more, they will send the pictures to my parents. Another girl, I tried to tell my dad, but he didn't care and instead yelled at me and said it was my fault. We see a lot of victim blaming, like I say, amongst children themselves, but a lot of victim blaming as well from parents, from teachers, from people, from police, from people that are close to these children that are supposed to help them in this situation. So victim blaming is something that we see a lot. You can change slides. Other guys I hung out with spread rumors and called me a whore. They said, "You're just a whore. Why should you get hurt?" And after this, I tried everything to avoid those thoughts and ended up trying to take my own life on a couple of occasions. Now that it's been 2 years, I think about it every day. I heard a week ago that someone I know saw the picture. And these are boys that the girl is hanging out with. These are so-called friends that are further pressuring her for more images. And like, just to repeat what we said, these are common patterns and themes among the free text answers. So it's not one child, it's a lot of children who are experiencing the same sort of situations. You can change slide. One of the boys said months later, sorry, and said how disgusting he felt to have agreed to share the image without consent. I didn't feel better when he said sorry. And you can change slide.
And as some of you might recognize, the hierarchy of sex is Gail Rubin's idea about the good and the bad sex, the sex that is okay and the sex that is not okay. Both in the survey and in the focus group, we have seen that sending images have a very, it looks the same way. It's okay to send nudes within a relationship to one person because you're in love, you send it for free, it's consensual, everything like that makes it okay. While sending to many people, sending for money, because you were threatened, that is not okay in same-sex relationships and so on. But the thing that is different from the classic hierarchy of sex is when this picture is spread without consent or shared without consent, then it doesn't matter if it was in the good or the bad circle. Because you have get it shared without consent, it's automatically coded as a bad, and that leading to the harassment of the children. You can change the slide because that's in Swedish, so that won't help anyone. And we also see how the children that have had their picture shared without consent trying to handle this vulnerability that occurs. And 2 common themes is they say, well, it was a lesson, I learned it, and I was betrayed. And we have two girls here. As you see, there is a lot of girl when it comes to this part of being victimized. We blocked them and did not care and thought we would never do it again. And then we had learned a lesson, is a 14-year-old girl that say. Then I did it because we had built up trust, and I also got pictures. But when I did not want to send more and cancel the contact, it was not good. Then he spread the pictures. Another girls. And here we see the first one is, okay, we learned a lesson, we did some stupid. The other one is saying, I did this in the good way because we trusted each other. And then I was betrayed by him because something changed in the relationship. A very common story. You can change slide. Another way to handle it through normalization. Like the betrayal part, it tells that I sent these pictures, but instead of saying I was betrayed, they say that everyone does this, and it's kind of bad luck if someone is sharing it without your consent. It's not really that important if you send it in the good way or the bad way. Done is done. You can actually not do anything. Besides, it's common to make such pictures, so it's really no wonder I sent things like that when we were still together. Everybody has a body, and I promise that most of my friends have sent nudes to guys. Nothing strange, really. So she's mostly saying that, well, those things happened. It wasn't my fault. It could happen to anyone. You can change slide. Then we have the counter-shaming and working with victims of sexual crime. The counter-shaming is a good thing because then you put the blame on the one who was violating you, who shared those pictures without consent. And we have those examples also. I live in a small town and everybody have seen my tips, but I don't let it ruin anything. I thought it was super hard at first, but now I look back on it as if it was just an insecure idiot. Or I have become stronger, and do not care a shit if an immature boy would think that no one has ever seen a girl's body and feels that he must show everyone. Both those girls are 17 years old and both talking about something that happened a few years ago. So coming up to the counter-shaming, to put the blame where it belongs, to build up yourselves, it takes time, but we have a few stories about this also. And generally we see these have a different way to answer and put blame in the stories also. You can change slide. So the conclusion here is we must understand that the reason for sending nude photos are multifaceted and are in many cases perceived as an unproblematic and positive thing. They share with partners, with friends as a way of exploring their sexuality. But when the image exceeds the boundary between the private and the public, the meaning of the picture changes beyond the child's control. Here it goes from being something private, something intimate, something the child have control over, to be something that other people are constructing as something bad. When those pictures are spreading, the image is often linked to the individual child, which is not the case in many other forms of abuse material. Here, it's by doxing, they put on personal information. It is often other children who does this. And so when the image change meaning, this has a direct effect on the child's view of themselves and the environment's view of the child. As we saw in the earlier quote about you just a whore, her old friends have changed their view on her to being just a whore, or just a slut. You can change slide.
And for the final conclusion, like I talked about earlier, the effects of non-consensual shaming often creates a long-term ongoing abuse for the vulnerable child. And we see this, for instance, when exposed accounts are constructed to link the images with an individual and facilitate new and serious violations of the child. There seems to be, it seems to be that the whole reason for doing this is to create more shame for the child, her himself. The attraction to visual gossip is a strong attraction for other children and adults to continue to subject the child to new abuse. You share the images, you share the link to the account, you spread it among selves. We have some big cases in Sweden where we have had this sort of exposed accounts shared among thousands of children. It's in the change in the meaning, not the actual content of the image or the context in which the images was created, that becomes decisive for the damage that is the damage for the child. Yeah, I think we'll stop there.
Yeah,
2 minutes too long.
Yeah.
We can skip the final page. And you can leave this on. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much for that presentation. It was really insightful. I wanted to ask straight away, because it's one that was brought up, but it's that element of victim blaming. It seems incredibly prevalent. What would you advise as a way to tackle victim blaming?
I think that what we are doing when it comes, especially when it comes in our helpline, is to make sure that we put the blame on the offender or the person that has abused the child. And it's not easy, but you have to think about how you speak about the victim itself. You have to think about we rarely use the term risk when we talk about this, because we know that as soon as you start talking about risks, you are automatically putting like the blame back on the victim, that the victim had taken her risks to do this and so on. And we also do a lot of parallels from kind of there's been an ongoing discussion about women being held accountable for being raped, for instance, in Sweden. The comments about what they were wearing or who they were with and so on. And this sort of argumentation that we have moved beyond, we see online now. So it's very important that when you meet children and we talk about these images, that you're not going into, but why did you do this or so on, that you put the blame on the offender yourself from the start. Yeah.
Focusing on the crime.
Yes, focusing on the crime and the offender. Yeah.
It was quite interesting, especially the example you provided, though, because obviously if a victim is blamed for the scenario, it's difficult for them to necessarily stand up and do something about it. But you had a victim who attempted 5 times to get a report through and couldn't, despite the fact that they were clearly under the age of consent and the perpetrator was clearly over. Is this a common theme that you see, that the reports are not necessarily taken seriously, or? Yeah,
it's about a priority. I would say that this sharing of nude images is not seen as just as a severe crime, for instance, as a rape is, which means that the resources that police get are less to investigate this sort of crimes. So that we see that a lot of the cases are not even pursued. The children themselves don't get any information about why they are, why they are not. And like this, the girl here said that she's tried to report it several times and nothing has happened. So it's seen as a less severe crime, which we've tried to illustrate today that it's not. And it's also, it leads to a series of different other crimes.
And I would say it's also is looked on as less serious if both are children or very young or young people. We also see that it's another theme in our survey is boys in the age 16 to 18 and girls in the age 10 to 12 are getting, is a quite common theme that they are meeting each other and sending those pictures online. And we also have the focus group that say, well, it's not, this boy would be embarrassed if it was offline. but online they can pursue those relationships and those pictures, which is of course really problematic if the police is also sending the signal that this isn't so serious.
No, absolutely. So we have some questions from the chat. I also want to ask some more questions, but I'll start with this one. So what kind of prevention or awareness for children and adults would you recommend then to tackle this head on? This is coming from Europol.
I would, or what we try to do is to focus on the problematic of sharing without consent, of focusing on how to have good and safe relationship and what is okay and what is not okay within a relationship. I think that's focusing on children and young people who might be at risk for abusing other children is the thing that we have to do. We have to stop putting the focus on the victims. We have to start talking about how to behave, what's illegal, what's not illegal. We see a lot of children they're not unaware of what is an illegal or illegal thing to do. So it's a lot about sharing information about their rights, what they're not supposed to do, what laws are relevant, and so on. So we try a lot of information sharing and focusing on preventing this from happening instead of trying to have children and young people stop sending the nudes, because it's not a problem sending a nude if it's consensual within a trusted relationship. It's a part of exploring your sexuality, whether us as adults like it or not. Children are going to continue doing this, so we have to start focusing on which behaviors are problematic and how to have healthy relationships online and how to explore your sexuality in a healthy way, and also focusing on how to make sure that you not abuse other children when you are doing this exploration.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It seems like a lot of pressure is being put on an assumption that people just know what is right and what is wrong.
Yes.
And as you gave in the example early on, which is very interesting, that they also had their own ideas of what was right and what was wrong, but they also determined if it was sent to me without my request, it was the rules go out the window. So there's all these nuances, such as, yeah, it's strange for adults to assume that children would make those distinctions. So I have another question. I'm hoping I can understand this one, but basically the question is, most of the cases seem to be about female identifying children having their images shared without consent, but were there many cases of male identifying children having their image shared without consent?
It's a lot of, I would say you can,
I can take that. I mean, it's 16% of the boys, about a third of the boys who send a new picture have also get it shared without consent. So that happens. But the rumors and the how the society penalize a boy that send is much less. What we see in the survey, however, is boys identifying themselves as in the LGBTQ group. LGBTQ, yes, that's English. They are in a much higher risk of getting victims of a crime, not just getting their new picture shared without consent, but also rape, selling different sexual and also in different way gets victimized. Those are in the same level as the heterosexual girls.
We also see that the boys, we have a lot of free text answers from boys as well, but it's mostly girls that are sharing their free text. Boys tend to leave shorter free text answers and perhaps not at all. I don't remember how many, 4,000? No, how many thousand?
It's around 800 free text from boys. We see the same thing in the helpline. Boys are much shorter, don't want to take about the feelings, want to talk about what happened and get to know, was this illegal, was this legal? Could boys be victim also? A very common question, in fact, is, I'm a boy and this happened to me. Is it serious? Is it a crime then also?
Oh, interesting, they're distinguishing the gender.
Themselves as a victim.
Do you also see that sort of difference in the type of victim blaming that occurs? Do you see male victim blaming?
Yeah, we see that boys tend to blame both girls and boys that have been victims of sort of sharing the images, but we see that the girls are more victimized than the boys. They are harder on girls than they are on boys. Yeah.
For a boy, it's more embarrassing to get it shared, while a girl is getting those continual abuses against her.
It's sort of a single time, a sort of event, as opposed to continuous. And also, It sounds like a bit more of an ethical and moral attack as well on a female.
Yeah.
Could you potentially elaborate a bit more on how you said that it's not necessarily the content of the non-consensual sharing, but as much as the context of that sharing?
What I'm meaning is that it's when the image from the start, the image is sharing in a positive way. It can be a form of like sexual exploration between two children. It could be something happy. It can be something flirtatious. The sharing of the image itself is not problematic. It's not illegal. For instance, in Sweden at least, it's with consent. They both agree on. It's a way of building trust, for instance.
And in fact, it can be very innocent. I mean, it can be a picture of you in a bra.
Yeah. It could be something that we wouldn't even see as an illegal image, for instance. But when the image is shared, it doesn't matter everything that happened before, or that it was a trusting relationship, or however. The image is then in Sweden as well. The sharing of this sort of images is illegal when it's not done with consent. When it's done to and especially when it comes to children under the age of 18. So it becomes illegal when it's shared without consent, but when it's shared with consent, it's legal. So it's both legally wrong and it's both ethically wrong.
And we also have examples when we see that there is fake pictures shared. It's not of the child, but these doxing, these rumors connected to this picture will in fact have real consequences for the child themselves.
So they haven't even shared content. They've simply been associated to an image that doesn't show anything identifiable.
Yeah.
We have another question. I think it sort of links into two, but when you look at the study as a whole, does it also looking into like the cultural diversity of the participants in the study, as well as the sexuality? You mentioned LGBTQ.
Yes, if they was born in another country or they have parents born in another country, one or two. Those things did not have any effect. No statistical significant effect, which kind of surprised us, but that was the result. We saw the LGBTQ, that was a great effect, especially for boys. We saw it on children not growing up with their parents. That was even larger than the gender effect. And those are all expected, but not on the cultural background or ethnic background or country of origin variables.
Did you see an increase in the sharing of this content or the potential, I guess, participation in sharing this content when it came to communities more so than individual behavior?
We can't really see that in the data. That is, we don't have any location on where the children are from, but we see that within, I see LGBTQ boys, for example, have a diverse set of sending news or sharing news. Those growing up without their parents are doing, if you use it here, you normally don't, but a riskier behavior, but also more blaming the victim when something went wrong. So for those groups we see common denominators that could explain.
Did you explore potentially as well the prior sexual abuse? Was that ever a factor in this, or is that an element that wasn't covered?
No, they've had yes, it was, but they've had to. They could answer if they've been abused to several other sexual crimes as well, and we can see that it's more common, for instance, among girls. Only 5% of the girls have never been sexually abused. 5%. 95% of them have been subjected to one or more sexual crimes. So we have investigated that as well, and it's in the report, so you can see that.
And sexual crime, then we focus on the crime. If they ask for sending naked nude pictures for money, we count that as a crime. If they get an unsolicited nude picture of another person without, then we count that as a crime. So it's not. But those other, if we didn't look at there, we would know that that would probably have some effect, but we haven't asked about it especially.
No, I'm just getting through the questions that we have our audience, so it's great to see they're engaged. I just want to make sure we cover them. So you also talk about sharing, and we have that example of someone who was looking at something 4 years after the fact. But did you look at mainly a sharing that was happening relatively soon after the image had been given, I guess, to the perpetrator, the eventual perpetrator, or did you see a lot more that sharing would happen later after the fact and would continue to happen?
We didn't ask for that specifically, but some of the children themselves disclosed if it had happened right after or it continued to happen. In the free text responses, you could see different stories, but it wasn't something that we asked them when did the images were spread. So that's not a question we had in the survey.
But we see a lot of those stories. It happened a few years ago. It still affects me every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the impact is definitely long-standing.
The other ones we get in our helpline, someone shared it today or last week.
Yeah.
And then we meet them in the helpline.
I just want to make sure I understand. So, do you get involved in the tackling of sorry, did you get the information on child grooming involved in the process?
Like Jonas said, we have had some themes where we see a lot of older boys, mostly 15 to 17, that are targeting younger girls. And when we talk to these girls in our helplines, we can see that these older boys are treating the young girls as their partners and are grooming them in different ways to make sure that they get these images, and then they are sharing them in those closed chat groups. So not a lot of grooming when it comes to adults. Some examples of that as well, but yeah. But mostly we have it when it comes to older boys and younger children. Jonas is in our helpline today, so that's why he had to rush off to make sure that there's okay there.
Oh yeah, no, of course, completely understand. We've definitely gone over the time, so I'm just gonna. Do you have a minute for a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up?
Sure, and you're more than welcome to contact us afterwards as well. That's fine with us both.
Yeah, so if anyone does have any questions that they don't feel were covered during the session, they can always email communications@inhope.org, and we'll make sure that they get through to Sophie and Jonas. So you talk about those normative rules and obviously the context of people normalizing the situation. Is it essentially that, children need to understand what the case is? Like, do children negotiate these rules actively before they send the images, or is it more implicit? So what children believe should be the case?
I would say it's both. We have a lot of stories where they have done it before, and especially when it's someone they know. But we also have situations where it's not negotiated, but like you say, it's something that's you just assume that that's something that's is a rule that works. So we see both, I would say.
Yeah.
I want to end on this one question because we have gone over, but I quite like this one. Do you believe that participants who filled out the survey were prepared and empowered enough to serve the online world? And do you think that they enjoy their digital citizenship skills?
I would say that a very hard question, very good question, and a very hard question. I would say that we as a community are failing children when it comes to helping them exploring their sexuality in a safe way. We are sending children out online without informing them on what are the positive aspects of it, but also what are the risks. And we can also see that, like Jonas say, a lot of the children live their lives online. They have all their social contacts there. They have fun there. They play. They have all their friends there. It's an important part of their lives. And we see that they're taking this as learning money, for instance. That it's something that you have to put yourself through in order to have to be online. And that's kind of something that children, it's kind of a truth that exists among children, that we as adults need to make sure that we are taking actions when the children are being exploited, but also not prohibiting them from being online, because the problem is not that children are online and having relationships or having friends and so on. The problem is that somebody is abusing them, and we need to put the blame back on the person who is offending, and we need to make sure that we talk to our children how to safely explore.
Yeah, this is about a dialogue, because we had also a parent survey where we find that over 90% of the parents say that it's always wrong to send a nude pictures if you're under the age of 18. 70% who says it's always wrong, regardless of age. That makes it very hard to tell your parents that you have done this, because we also see that the parental advice are mostly just add friends, never give up any personal information, and for God's sake, don't send nude pictures. It's just about 1 in 20 parents that added on their advice, when something are going wrong, come and talk to me. Because expect people to get it wrong. I mean, the EU Kids Online have this great question in their survey about do you have rules on your internet behaviors? And the children answer yes, almost every children have. But they also have the question, do you break those rules? And the majority of children does. And if something goes wrong, then it's very hard to tell your parents. And the parent will blame you, not act as if you were a victim of a crime.
No, that's really interesting. Do you have that the parental survey available in English?
No, I don't think so.
No, unfortunately not.
Well, maybe we can look at translating some of the summary notes and including these in the recap for next week, because I think it'd be very interesting to cover that, because it's this quite interesting dynamic of setting rules, and if you break the rules, you've taken the risk, and if you take the risk, you deserve the blame, and it's a rather vicious circle.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we will be keeping in touch, and we will be following up with any of the questions that we didn't cover enough today. But of course, if anyone wants to submit a question again to communications@inhub.org, we'll make sure that those get through to today's presenters. But on that note, I'd like to thank Jonas and Sophie very much for today's session. It was really interesting, and yeah, would love to have you again, basically. But for now, I'd like to wish everyone a great rest of the day. And we'll see you next week if you're going to be joining our webinar with Special Agent Austin Berrier on live streaming, which is next week, Wednesday. But for now, thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.